Welcome to the apiary. Today I want to talk about what can be a fun and welcome event, or the thing you least want to see, and that is swarming. Swarming is either going to be your favorite or least favorite thing about beekeeping. If it's your bees that are swarming, quite often it's one of the most aggravating things you're going to see. If it's someone else's bees or some wild bees you're going to catch, it's actually one of the more enjoyable aspects of beekeeping. Now, that said, there's several types of swarming behavior and things confused with swarming behavior. Now, before getting into this video too deep, I had the realization that when I see a swarm, and I'll see dozens in a year, that I almost never record them. I asked around for some videos and received some great ones, and I'll be sharing them here. When we talk about swarming, we are usually talking about reproductive swarms during the spring. But there are several variants of swarming behavior, and some behaviors that are actually confused with it. Now, reproductive swarms are how the bees reproduce at the colony level. And what I mean by that is that's how they make more colonies, as opposed to more bees. Amongst the swarming types, we have reproductive swarms with mated queens and reproductive swarms with virgin queens. In the spring, once enough stores are coming in and a significant population has built up in the hive, the colony will launch a primary swarm that includes the old queen and about half of the adult bees in the colony. This swarm tends to be a big one, somewhat organized, and has a tendency to bivouac closer to the ground. Bivouac means camping without cover, and is the name we give that initial swarm cluster that develops outside of the hive. These spots are usually within line of sight of the original colony. This is the stage after bivouacking, the big move, relocation. At this point, the destination has been decided, and the bees will move rapidly out of bivouac into the selected site. We see this swarm has been attracted to a swarm trap and is making its way inside. Notice how rapidly the bees are marching in. Bees are very pheromone oriented, and we see bees on this box scenting or nasonoving, attracting the other bees to the entrance. The bees can also smell the used equipment inside, and they are actively searching for a dark place to set up shop, so they will rapidly enter this trap. This trap is a somewhat common design, where a skirt has been added to a deep box to bump up the empty volume. Tim built these skirts out of poplar fence board and would catch 30 to 40 swarms with his 20 swarm traps. You can be very successful with some well thought out swarm trapping. I'd highly encourage you to look into swarm trapping if you haven't done so. There are also secondary and even tertiary swarms, also known as afterswarms. These swarms usually launch about a week after the primary swarm and absorb a lot of the remaining newly emerged bees from the original colony. These swarms launch with one or more virgin queens in tow. They tend to be smaller swarms, less organized with looser flight clouds, and have a tendency to bivouac higher in the air. Reproductive swarms are generally docile and actively finalizing where they want to move while bivouacked. Occasionally, and this is rare, the colony will know where it is headed already and skips the bivouac step. Usually these bees are going to move into an unoccupied space, preferably one that had been inhabited by a bee colony prior. Sometimes a swarm cluster will form a bivouac, and before they finalize their move, they end up going back into the original hive. I call these pump fake swarms. For whatever reason, the swarm decided to abort and return home. It could be the queen didn't make it out, or they thought weather conditions were going to sour. There are some instances where these swarms won't be docile, or up to a beekeeper boxing them. There are two variations of this problem, but they both involve a bivouac getting stuck. One is hangry bees, or a dry swarm. This is a swarm that burned through its honey reserves and is now approaching starvation. And just like us, they get a bit grumpy when they're hungry. We can also find swarms that get stuck and end up building comb where they are. In general, Apis mellifera do not build comb out in the open, but do when the cluster becomes trapped by weather. These will no longer be docile bees when you try to box them. They have comb and a nest to defend. This is also why I recommend full PPE when shaking a swarm, as I have shaken a quote-unquote swarm into a box only to see the foot of new comb afterwards. Catching reproductive swarms when we want more colonies is welcomed. Swarming is ultimately a sign of health, that the colony is performing well enough to reproduce. Something I like to do when I have spare equipment in an apiary or my storage area is stage it as a swarm trap. That just means setting up the right space with the right frames, often right on a hive stand. You want your equipment working as much as it can for you, and doing this can yield a bonus colony every now and again. That said, not all swarms are great additions. Take for instance this swarm. This one was discovered on the ground, and I have found these ground swarms can frequently have a queen problem, like a queen that couldn't handle the flight or died en route. Now there could be a problem. We could also be collecting and propagating bees that are overly swarmy. In my area, bees can only handle moderate amounts of swarming due to needing to build a strong enough colony to survive winter. Colonies with higher rates of swarming might survive in more temperate climates, and while they won't survive here without help, there are always some beekeepers around shipping in or feeding those bees. Now, if these are our bees swarming, depending on your management approach, this can be a bad thing. Swarming is ultimately a natural event the bees are keen to do, and is something very difficult to totally prevent, especially for a new beekeeper. Swarm control and its related methods will constitute a future video all its own. That said, even the best beekeepers have some swarming, whether they know it or admit it. This is a swarming double queen colony, which has roughly twice the number of bees as a regular colony. The Bivouac cluster was absolutely massive, and this photo doesn't give credit to that. They landed in a multiflora rose, and I really couldn't get any closer without either getting pricked by the rose or having bees fall on my head. So realize this swarm was actually behind me in this picture. It was about 4 gallons. Now, what about other swarm-related or swarm-like behaviors? Not all swarms are benign, and this is one of them. This is the rare hostile takeover swarm. This was an occupied 5-frame nuke, but it was admittedly a weak colony. It was probably 2.5 frames of bees. This football-sized swarm strong-armed their way into this colony and took it over, undoubtedly killing the old queen in the process. I can only speculate if the original colony's bees were accepted or dispatched. There is also absconding. Absconding occurs when bees decide they need to abandon their original nest because something has gone wrong. Because a large amount of bees come out and bivouac somewhere, it is often confused for reproductive swarming, but the old nest is not outfitted to survive afterwards. There aren't any prepared queen cells or a large in-weight population. The old colony is essentially beeless, though the beekeeper on a future inspection might find some bees in the now queenless colony. The bees are often the abandoned brood that emerges, the more mature brood that survived. I have seen abscons for a few reasons. Uncontrolled mite issues are the most common cause. In a normal year, I'll see abscons around August or October, though in early spring can move it forward greatly. In the early spring of 2023, I witnessed, or I'd rather identified, an abscond in June. Another cause can be mite-controlled fumigants, particularly formic and thymol products. They work by filling the box with fumes, and the fumes are very aggravating to the bees, and the bees can end up being forced out of the box. I've also seen small hive beetles induce an abscond. Most hives are totally capable of managing small hive beetle, but occasionally I'll see a hive overwhelmed by them. This usually involves comb being out of spec or avoiding bee space. We also have usurpation swarms. These are small war party swarms that look to take over healthy colonies with their own queens. These usually in my area are a late summer phenomenon and don't occur during normal swarm season. They are a complex subject well reserved for a video all its own. Lastly, we have three behaviors that are often confused for swarming. They are robbing, washboarding, and bearding. Robbing is where bees mob a resource to take the honey or nectar or syrup out of it. This is a stack of sticky supers I wasn't able to put back on the hives, so this stack is getting mobbed by groups of bees that are there to take the resources off of it. This is not a swarm. These bees are all going to head back to their respective colonies afterwards. In this one, we have a little 5-frame nuke, rather weak colony that was getting robbed, and I ended up shoving grass into the entrance to keep the robber bees out and give that little colony a chance to reconstitute its defenses. Some colonies, before swarming, essentially cover the entire entrance and face of a hive. The hive is full of bees, and the bees are readily awaiting the starting bell. This can be a warning sign, especially during swarm season, especially when temperatures are generally cool. However, both washboarding and bearding have similar appearances. Bearding is a response to high temperatures, where bees will evacuate the nest and hang out on the surface of the hive, reducing the temperature inside the colony. This can be reduced using ventilation or a slanted bottom rack, though it really isn't a problem that needs fixing. Washboarding is a fun behavior, where the bees move in this rhythmic fashion. We don't know why the bees do this, though it is fun to witness. With that, we've reviewed swarming and what looks like swarming, and I'll say good luck and happy beaking.